I had a leader that I knew that we were having dinner one night, and I asked him, "What do we have comparable roles. What do you see as your job?" And he said, "My job is to manage exceptions." And I'm kind of waiting, I'm kind of leaning, okay, and he said, "That's it. I manage exceptions, because if you have your processes in place and you have the right people in the right seats, the business goes on. But when those times come up that things aren't right, I have to step in as the leader and figure out, okay, how are we going to get through this?" And I thought that was an interesting perspective. That's a perspective in delegation and letting your team do their thing.
What was the last storm you faced in your life or in your career, even in your leadership journey? And how did you get through it? What are you going to do differently next time? How has it changed your outlook on career, leadership, life? My guest this week is Bill Derrick. He will be talking about his own journey from his civil engineering background to successful entrepreneur in the construction industry. He talks through some of those challenges, some of those storms that he has faced in his career, like the big credit crash, the recession of 2008. He talks about the importance of resilience, how faith helps him through these things, his positive attitude, and how that can support in overcoming adversity. He also reflects a little bit on some of the storms of life, not just career, and the lessons that he's learned from his experiences, including the value of knowing when to seek help, the significance of leadership, and particularly an approach to it that puts empathy and support, people first. And drawing all of these things together, we talk about how it's all shaped his perspective on life and on leadership. I really enjoyed recording this episode as kind of a heartwarming story at the center of it all, and a positive outlook on life, leadership, and career that I think any manager, whether you're new or experienced, could benefit from. So give us an hour and a bit of your time today. See what you can learn from Bill's experiences, from his story. And do listen to the end or check those show notes below for links to Bill's websites, to learn more about him, and perhaps take the next step on your journey to getting through the storms of life.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Bill, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's great to have you on the show today.
Likewise, David. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, to kick us off, over to you. Tell us a bit about your career so far, what you do, why you do it.
My career, I went to school at the University of Minnesota, got a civil engineering degree. Went back a few years after that. Went to school at night and got an MBA degree in finance. I kind of set myself up to, in my mind, my goal was to be an executive in a larger firm, maybe construction oriented, real estate oriented, something like that, because I kind of grew up in that. My father, was a contractor, and so it's kind of what I knew. Anyway, I did out of college. I took a nice job with a large, heavy construction contractor that did locks and dams and bridges and mine shafts, tunnels, stuff like that. It was actually kind of fun. My first job, I was on a lock and dam project in Alabama. A little bit of a culture shock for a young man from the upper Midwest, but nonetheless, it was a great experience. From there, I went to work for a large building contractor and worked on high-rise construction buildings, mostly in downtown Minneapolis. A couple of the taller buildings there I can put my name on and said I was there during construction, which is kind of fun. And then from there, I moved around. I went to another contractor that worked on medical office buildings, some warehouses, stuff like that. And it was about, I was into my career well over a dozen years. And my father called me one day and said he was thinking about retiring. He was still a young man. He was in his early 60s and thinking about retiring early and selling the company to his boys or whoever wanted to. So, and I was the oldest son. And he said, so if you're at all interested, now's the time. And it was a little disruptive because without going into it would be like, the only thing I can compare it to is like if my wife and I with our kids were living on we were way over on the west side of the Twin Cities, and his business is in, our business is in western Wisconsin. So the other side of the Twin Cities. So it was quite a jaunt. It was very disruptive to our lives. And I was really kind of unsure. I had a good job. I mean, I was working for a gentleman that I enjoyed working with. We were doing some great stuff together. I felt valued with him. But then one day I had breakfast with a gentleman that I had met. He owned a large concrete and masonry company, and I had a lot of respect for him. And I sat down with him at breakfast and told him my dilemma. And he said, tell you what, Bill, let's get up and walk around the restaurant and do a survey of those that would like to continue working for someone else and getting paid whatever someone else tells them they're going to get paid, or would like to have ownership in their own company. And I looked at him and just kind of, the light went on, David, and I just kind of said, okay, I get the hint. So I decided to go over there, and started in business with two of my brothers and then one other gentleman that was about my age that had been working with my dad out of college, and we knew him real well. So it was a good partnership. And with my dad, there was 5 of us that kind of took over the company and grew it from there. And this was in the early 90s. And we've been going since then. And now it's myself and my younger brother, the primary owners. And, things are doing well. That's kind of the career path I followed.
Well, fair enough. Yeah. I mean, it feels like a no-brainer after you've done it, though, doesn't it? But at the time, like, I can totally get that because it's a risk, and you're trading job security and like predictability of income for you don't know what yet. So it's not that clear-cut a choice, I think.
David, it's one of those things where there was a few years where I said, if I would have just continued my upward mobile career path, I could be making a lot of money without all the risk. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there was times I thought about that, but there were other times where I said, I'm great. I had a gentleman that my wife and I knew that he always said to us, the problem with working for someone else is eventually you're going to get fired. And at first I said, well, that's ridiculous. I'm not ever going to get fired. But he said, so what happens when you turn 65? And I said, well, I might retire. What happens if you don't want to retire then? You're going to retire. And so, it's that way. And so here I am now. I'm 71. I'm not bragging about this. I'd like to tell people I look rather marvelous for 71 years old, but I keep myself young, my mind young, and I still enjoy being involved in the business, and no one necessarily is forcing me to leave. And that's that kind of freedom is kind of nice. So
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I agree because I also own and run my own business.
yes,
So,
yes, you
um,
know the feeling. Yep.
yeah, I mean, there definitely was that moment, and I think that the financial security is not to be underestimated, and we'll talk about that again in a minute, I'm sure. But there's also there's always, when you're working for someone else, particularly if you've been there for a while, there's always reasons to stay doing that and to avoid the unknown and not do the other thing. But
Yeah.
looking back in hindsight, I'm guessing it's the same for you, but I sort of wish I'd done it 5 or 10 years earlier than I did, because knowing now what I didn't know then, it's freedom is
Yeah.
the word, isn't it? But also it's not just freedom. It's not just that you get to be the one who decides. It's also the impact you have. Like everything you do has an impact on your business. So it's powerful in that respect as well.
Just asked the other day what my overall goal is at 71 years old and looking forward. And of course, I'm doing, I've become an author now, and I do some public speaking, and, get a chance to be on podcasts with people like you. And I'm also got my day job, I say, and it's kind of like, so what's your overall goal? And I said, that really hasn't changed. It's using my faith to make a positive impact on the lives of others in all I do. And to that, somewhat to your point, if you have your own company, if you're, the leader, so to speak, of the company, you have a little bit more flexibility in how you accomplish that. I can have, I can do some things that I couldn't do if I was just an employee of the company, unless I could convince my boss that, hey, we should do this, And of course he said, yeah, we'll get back to you later, it's the usual, so. But,
yeah, I mean, there is a lot to be said for not having to waste months of your life getting the boss bought in on some thing that is a good idea, but they won't accept
and
it.
then him coming out with this great idea that you told him about, and he takes credit for it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a cliche for a reason, isn't it? Because it happens so much.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but for me, the mental health aspect as well. We hear a lot about solopreneurs and entrepreneurs and burnout and stress and all of that. I've kind of had the opposite experience, really. My mental health has only got better since I started working for myself. I don't know. Maybe I'm odd.
Yeah, there's stress. It depends on, some of it depends on business. And
true.
If we get a chance, as we get into my story a little bit, during the downtimes, your mental health is challenged. Let's put it that way. I'm not saying it has to go negative, but it does get to be challenging, especially when you realize the number of people and families and that you're responsible for as an employer. So.
Yeah, I guess I'm fortunate in that I'm a solopreneur, so I don't necessarily have that aspect to worry about, although I've still got to pay the bills and keep the roof over our heads. And,
you got to pay the bills, yeah.
Yeah, but then I'm not alone in that either. So there we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, the timing of when you were running a business, and particularly in that industry as well, I know we're going to get into the adversity side of things as well, but obviously 2008 is going to loom pretty large, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, how did you deal with that kind of adversity, and what did you learn from those experiences?
Yeah, I think the first thing I had to do was realize it was adversity, that this was a problem. I think it's tough. You recognize that things aren't going as good as we want them to. Maybe it'll just get better here in a few months. Maybe it's a short-term thing. Maybe it's, and maybe it's not going to be that bad. And, you talk, you sit around your conference room table with your partners, and we're all kind of trying to help each other out as far as keeping, keeping your attitude good. And, the experts going into 2007 into 8, the experts, I understand experts. I don't know if I quite respect them as much as I used to, but the experts said that we were going to have a downturn in the housing industry of about 10%, and it might last for 6 months to a year, and then everything will bounce back. Well, that's not the way it was. And, so for certain for us, it's not the way it was. And it was much, much, much worse. And, we were probably doing 25, 30% of what we were doing before the recession.
Wow.
Well, when you build a business plan and put the overhead in place and everything else to handle that kind of revenue, and then all of a sudden, 75% of it is wiped out, it's tough. But as I was saying, I think the first thing is you got to recognize you got a problem. And I know in our case, some of the things we had to do, like get rid of some of our equipment, lay off some people. The layoffs of the people was really tough. And I think our firm, along with others during that time, one of the mistakes they made, and I say that lightly because is it really a mistake? But one of the things that we did was hang on to employees longer than maybe we should have, hoping that things would get better and not wanting to see people lose their jobs. But quite frankly, we laid off well over half of our workforce, and it was really tough. So we had to do some proactive things to account for the financial side of it. And then we really had to have the attitude of we're still in business and we still need to act like business people, and we need a plan, and we have to have a plan going forward. The plan does not look at all like our strategic plan that we had in place, but it's time we change that plan and have a plan for survival. You kind of go into a survival mode, I guess, and it's amazing what you will do and what your mind will do when you get in that survival, mode. When you got that tiger chasing you down, you're in survival mode. And in our case, that tiger was several banks, 3 or 4 banks that we were dealing with, that we had loans with, and we weren't making enough revenue anymore now to pay them back. A lot of our land was just sitting there, was undeveloped land waiting to be developed. Well, there's no revenue off that land. There's only costs involved. And so we had to put that plan together, and it became mainly my responsibility to work with those bankers and to come up with a plan that they could live with. Some things like, just trying to convince them that we were worth more to them alive than we were dead. Dead being, you go ahead and foreclose on us and sue us, take our property, and come after us because of the personal guarantees that we had signed. You can do that, but in the end, you're going to get more money by letting us live and trying to pay you back. And eventually, after many years, we did pay everybody back. And so that was one thing, trying to just work through that. And but the hardest thing is you have to develop this attitude of quitting's not an option. And that came from a conversation I had during that time with a gentleman that was a general manager of a car dealership in town. And it was probably around 2009 or something like that, somewhere in there. And I think the auto industry was starting to come back. The Recession Act officially ended in the fall of 2009. You would never know it in our business because ours was maybe a 5-year deal. well into 2012. But I was talking to him, and I said, the hardest thing, Mike, is not knowing when it's going to end and not knowing when it's going to end. I mean, it's just really hard. That was starting to weigh on me a lot at that time. And he, over the phone, he just said, well, you can determine the ending right now if you'd like. And I said, how would I do that? And he said, just quit. Give the land back to the bankers, let them sue you, on and on. And on the phone, I said, well, quitting's not an option. And it was like he woke up that part of my brain that maybe hadn't been speaking very loud, And from that point on, I realized the job as leader was every day to have an attitude that I'm going to do something today that's going to get us one step closer to getting out of here and one step closer to actually surviving. Some days you didn't know what that was, but at least you had that mental attitude that, we're working towards ending this in a positive way, not waiting for the Grim Reaper to come and close us down. And that's, I think that's when you face the adversity, you gotta really, that's really important, that attitude of not quitting.
Yeah, and it must have been a bit, what's the word, galling, I suppose, having to deal with the banks when, it's fair to say the whole thing was their fault, I think, in the first place. Like,
well, yeah, I'll put it this way, that everybody during that time wanted to place blame on somebody. If it wasn't the banks, it was the appraisers that overappraised property, and it was the developers who were buying property with no money down, so to speak. We didn't do that, but didn't do any good. All the money we put into our land and stuff, and we're talking tens of millions of dollars here. All that we put into it was gone.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, values went, and so it was a tough time. It was, I think one thing that helped me during that time was having never gone through something like that before. I didn't know what I didn't know. So I was creative a little bit. I'd go into a banker and I'd say, here's the deal. Here's how this is going down, using that phrase. We're going to do this and this. We'll pay you back this. And the banker would look at me and say, what do you, it's kind of like, where'd you come up with this? We don't do that. And I said, why not? Do you not want your money back? Isn't this a reasonable approach? And eventually we'd come up with something that, along that line or something that, So we were creative, but obviously we needed it to end. I mean, we couldn't have gone on forever that way. And that's one of the advice that I would give people that are going through hard times, not just financial times, medical or loss of a loved one, the grieving process, whatever it is. I call them storms in life. I always say, one of the first things I say for advice is the storm will end. Even though when you're in the middle of the storm, it feels like it's going to go on forever. And that is a hard thing to face. So if you can face it up, as soon as possible, that this storm will end. May not end the way you want it to. Not all storms end with everybody lived happily ever after type thing, but the storm will end. And sometimes that storm is the hardest. It is really hard. And, we're grieving, so to speak, in a financial situation or whatever it is. We're grieving from not being where we were because we liked where we were. And all of a sudden the storm comes and upsets everything. And really what we're doing is we're on a journey to someplace else, a new normal. And we don't like that storm. And we think it's going to be with us forever. And it isn't. It will end.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I've heard that a few times when we talk about resilience, for example. And I think one of the most important aspects to someone's ability to be resilient is knowing that there is light at the end of the tunnel. However, eventually it may be, it is still going to be there.
That's right.
And I think that speaks to like the human mindset, human condition a little bit, doesn't it? Like if we're stuck in something and there's no perceivable end to it, it makes it a lot harder to cope with. So
Yes.
great point. Yeah. So something else that I think you've hinted at there, and something I know you've spoken about in the past, is taking pride in needing to be in control. Now, that seems like in these sort of situations, these sort of storms, I mean, that's kind of impossible, isn't it? Let alone being able to take pride in it. So, I mean, how did that perspective change over time and through these experiences?
Well, it needed to change. And anyone that reads my book, Restored by the Storm, the first few chapters are about the pride I had in that I was in control of everything. And, pride can be good. Pride's a good thing. I don't mean to, in this case, we're kind of painted it more as not so good, but I had life all figured out. And my wife and I were very successful in the business world. And then when we started having our family, I mean, I always say we were even successful there. We had boy, girl, 4 kids, boy, then a girl, then boy, then a girl, I mean, so everything we did, we just planned on succeeding because we were in control. And I probably didn't have a lot of empathy for those people who, whatever was going on, I probably had more of a buck up, it'll get better, type attitude. And, but this financial storm, and I don't mean to say that the 2 storms I talk about in my book are the only 2 storms I've faced in life, but they're the 2 that I wrote about, probably the 2 most momentous storms. But really the first storm, the business financial storm, I describe it as God deciding to take a 2x6. So I was in construction, or am in construction, take a 2x6 and hit me upside the head and said, you need to learn a few things. And when you're in the situation we were in during the Great Recession, you find out that you're not necessarily in control. And you have to relinquish a lot of control to a lot of people. Bankers, in our case, were probably number 1. And accountants and, consultants and all that. And in a way, it was like a weight was lifted off of me. Yeah, it was sad that I couldn't control things the way I wanted to, but it was also a weight lifted off of me that, you mean I don't have to I'm not in charge of keeping all the balls in the air all at the same time, and that some things aren't going to go the way I want them to. And the attitude I have now, and I tell people that, quite frankly, we can control 2 things in life. Now, I could sit down with a lot of people and we could have a philosophical discussion about it. But for me, it's pretty simple. We can control our attitude and we can control our effort. And the attitude is just extremely important, especially during hard times. And the one thing that, I like to quote Zig Ziglar, because he would always say, an attitude of gratitude. You got to have an attitude of gratitude. And, certainly that, a positive attitude, it just, things are going wrong or not going right. Doesn't mean you can't go by somebody's office and smile and ask them how they're doing and just say, what a great day. Now, they're going to think you're nuts, but you know what? There's something to that. So I look at life now, and probably I wish I would have learned it a lot sooner, that I work on controlling my attitude, and I make sure I'm putting the effort in that I need to put in whatever it is I'm doing. So that, getting back to the control thing, as a leader, I still have to be able to do the things leaders need to do. But I'm also aware that I'm probably not as good as I think I am, and that you have to understand that you're not 100% in control.
Yeah, that humility piece is really important. I'm trying to. There's that proverb, isn't
Really,
there?
is that what I was saying? Being humble?
I think
Yes,
so. I think so. Like
absolutely.
the humility, yeah. But it's
Yes.
important for leadership, isn't it, as well as for life? I guess is
Yeah,
what I'm saying.
it absolutely is. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm trying to remember that proverb or that prayer, the one about letting go of the things you can't control and controlling what you can, and then the wisdom to know the difference. I can't remember it exactly, but you know the one I mean.
You did a good job of paraphrasing it. And
Good.
in fact, I was just talking to my wife this morning before I came into my office to do this, and I just told her about the Bible verse I had read this morning, and I consider her, she's studying the Bible all the time, and she belongs to a Bible study group, a large one, and she's just a magnificent woman. And I said, look, I'm better at paraphrasing than I am at quoting scripture. And I paraphrased to her what I had read, and it was a nice scripture. And what you just did, I mean, that's, the importance is what's the essence of that. And yes, we need guidance. A good leader realizes he doesn't have all the answers. And I think that was one of the lessons I learned during that time. I had to rely on a lot of people. I went to bankers. I built relationships with bankers that we obviously weren't borrowing money from them, but I knew them, and I would call them up and say, hey, this is Bill Derrick at Derrick Companies. Wonder if I can come over and just have a conversation with you. And most bankers, that's what they do. We'd sit down, and then I'd get that relationship, and then I kind of, in so many words, say, we need help. I'm not asking you for financial help because I know that's not possible given our situation. But I need, some of your wisdom from a banking perspective and what we do. I don't think that's something I would have done before the Great Recession. And, I learned that I need to get as much input as I can from other people and use that wisdom to help us go forward. So.
Yeah, it's another very powerful leadership lesson, isn't it? And we hear buzzwords a lot these days, like vulnerability is one of them, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, there's that thing around, and you just gave words to it just a minute ago about leaders having that expectation, like not just from others, but for themselves, that being a leader means I have the answers. I know all the things. I can solve the problems. I can do all of those things. But actually, in that context of when things are going wrong, what that usually leads us into as leaders is not being able to ask for help when we need it. And I think that's such an important lesson because, the team you're leading, the company you're leading, if you can't ask for help when you need it, it's all going to fall apart really quickly, isn't it?
Very quickly. And you know what? If you're working with your team members together like that, guess what they feel? They feel valued. They want to, even if, they're not an owner, they know that it's not their financial risk. Their job is at risk, but beyond that, and they appreciate the fact what you're going through, and they appreciate the fact that you value them enough that you're willing to listen to them. So
Absolutely. I mean, it feels like a stupid thing to say that if you don't ask for help, then nobody will help you. But like, it's so obvious, isn't it? And yet, so many people, like, we get tied up in our own minds, don't we? And just afraid to do it.
And you follow that, say, well, if that's so stupid, it's so easy. How come people don't do it?
Well, I'm not saying it's easy, but obvious, maybe. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's easier for some people than others, I guess. So, the storms in life you've mentioned, I mean, first of all, actually, tell us a bit more about the book, because you kind of touched on it, but I think everyone would like to hear more about that. I certainly would.
People say, well, wait a minute, you said you have an engineering degree, a business degree, and you're in construction, real estate, and all this. And how does a guy like you write a nonfiction book like I wrote? I go, well, I got this other side of my brain too, and every now and then it fires off. But while we were going through this financial storm, I would say things like, I'm going to write a book, and it's going to be what the experts don't tell you. Because, getting back to the experts again, but yeah, this is how you do business. You got to do this, and this. You got to hire these people, all that. Well, there's a lot of other things that they don't tell you that, quite frankly, you learn the hard way. And so I always said, well, I'm going to write a book about that. And I'd tell our accounting firm that, our principal who we worked with, I keep telling him, I want to write this book. He said, well, you do that, Anyway, so the book is about, I lead into those hard times that we had. I'm very vulnerable in the book. I talk about things that a lot of people wouldn't talk about. I just kind of lay myself open, saying, this is who I am. Yes, this is how I felt during this time. And I dare say that any of my partners in the business at that time, brothers, others that would read that book would probably say, oh, come on, you didn't really feel it. I mean, you don't talk about things like this, and so I kind of laid that open because I realized I wanted to touch the lives of people who are going through hard times. And the best way to do that is to be vulnerable and to let them know how I felt, what I was thinking, what I was going through, what I cried about during that time. And, how my faith grew during that time and, all that. And so I didn't want it to be a book. People say, well, it's a biography or it's a memoir, I guess it'd be the better way to put it. And I go, yeah, maybe you could say that, but no, it's a business book. It's a book about getting through hard times and how we do that. And I'm using my story in a vulnerable way to do that. But anyway, from there, the book talks about how we got through the Great Recession. And I don't mean to spoil it for anybody, but we did get through the Great Recession. We did survive. And quite frankly, right now we're thriving. And, but right after the Great Recession, that was for us, like I said, about 2012, things were starting to turn around. The light at the end of the tunnel appeared and things are going pretty good, but I started to get some aches and pains. And mainly my chest, around into my shoulder areas and that, some aches and pains that were just unexplainable. I'd be out jogging and I could feel, the old word chest pains, but they weren't, I knew there wasn't a heart issue. Something that wasn't right. So they did a lot of tests and one thing led to another. And, in the fall of 2013, I was, basically Thanksgiving week. I was diagnosed with a non-curable blood cancer called multiple myeloma. Deadly disease. It's killed a lot of people over the years. And at the time, depending on what stats you want to look at and believe, but the average life expectancy from diagnosis was 7 years. And so the rest of the book kind of goes into that journey and the things I went through. And, everything from radiation to chemotherapy to in 2016, I had a stem cell transplant, which is a horrible procedure in that they basically kill every cell in your blood system with a strong dose of chemo. And then they replant your stem cells back in a couple days later. And within 10, 12 days, you go down, down, down from an immunity standpoint. You're one of those walking dead. By then you have no hair. You're walking around with a mask on, baseball cap because you have no hair, stuff like that. You just kind of lumber around because you have no energy. And anyway, then things start to get back, and I was out of work for four months, and that gave me a lot of time to think. I talk about this was the time that God gave me to say, I want you to stop and think. In fact, God said, I'm going to make you stop and think. And as I was telling somebody the other day, I know for some people in your audience will probably say, oh yeah, well, whatever, and that's okay. We're all in different place in our lives with our faith. But I told somebody the other day that I was talking with that I can see the things in my life that God is touching, that God is involved in. Sometimes you hear people say, well, that was a God thing. And some people just kind of roll their eyes, whatever. But there are a lot of things in our lives where you can see that. And I just sat on my recliner and started thinking about a lot of stuff. And all of a sudden, when I felt well enough, I took my laptop out, put it on my lap, and I started writing. And it started with my journey through cancer. Seemed like an obvious thing to do. I'm sure a lot of people do that when they're going through cancer stuff. And then I was asked to be a keynote speaker at a conference for a national organization that I was involved in. And I said, well, I'm not sure if I'll be well enough. But anyway, I got clearance from Mayo Clinic where I was going. And we flew down there, my wife and I gave a keynote speech where I talked about what had happened. I told my story, business, cancer. I stood up there with not a stitch of hair on my head. Well, maybe some fuzz here and there, but, didn't look really great, but told my story. And I realized then that I had a powerful story that needed to be written. And not, David, this isn't about, hey, look at what I've gone through. I've gone through stuff that nobody else has. No, it's not about that. A lot of people have. And the story is really important. And I think, if I must say so myself, I tell it in a very compelling way. But and how I got through it all is really important and really interesting. But the most important thing that I want people to see in my story, in my book, in my keynote speeches, is what I learned and how that can inspire them to have, like you said earlier, the resilience to get through life. And that's why I wrote the book. Yes, I get into my faith, and because that's an important part of me. And I think, the most important part of me, but I also talked about practical things like gratitude and don't quit and things like that. And I tell it in a way that says, here's where I'm at that point. I'm not doing real well, but yet I realized that I still didn't have this attitude. And so I wrote the book, and that's how it came about. That's what it's about. So I'm having fun with that. I'm having fun getting up in front of people and telling my story. And, God, I believe, gave me gave me a speaking voice. He gave me a very good voice for speaking. I've had some good friends that I can take it from, and they say, "Yeah, you have a face made for radio." So
yes, I've heard that one as well.
Yeah. But I believe he gave me a voice, and he's given me a story to tell, and that's kind of the way I look at it. So that's the book in a nutshell.
Something that really struck me in that story is that you only had 4 months off of work. That doesn't seem enough for such a severe condition. But fair enough.
I think you would. I think my wife would remind me that I was ready to go back after 3, and she said, "Oh no, oh no." So it was a difficult time.
Yeah.
But I've never had anybody say that before. Only 4 months. To me, it seemed like such a long time. And the first month was basically the procedure and all that. Probably took me 6 weeks to really recover to the point that I was pretty sure that what I was eating wasn't going to reappear, if you know what I mean. And, stuff like that. So, I mean, it was, to me, it was a long time, and I am so grateful that I had brothers and partners who were willing to take care of things while I was gone. I had one brother that when I got back saying, "I don't want your job, and I'm never again going to question what you do around here." Because sometimes as CEO, you're taking care of the things that, sometimes don't show up. I mean, I'm not running jobs. I'm not doing estimates for jobs, and not out in the job site a lot, that kind of thing. And people don't necessarily, know what it is I do, but there's a lot of things in leadership that are done without people really knowing what that is. So,
well, yeah. I mean, if you're good at it anyway, very true.
I had a leader that I knew that we were having dinner one night, and I asked him, "What do you see? We have comparable roles. What do you see as your job?" And he said, "My job is to manage exceptions." And I'm kind of waiting, I'm kind of leaning, okay, and he said, "That's it. I manage exceptions, because if you have your processes in place and you have the right people in the right seats, the business goes on. But when those times come up that things aren't right, I have to step in as the leader and figure out, okay, how are we going to get through this?" And I thought that was an interesting perspective. That's a perspective in delegation and letting your team do their thing.
I agree. It's an interesting perspective. I'm not sure I'm with him. To me, managed by exception, that's a classic project manager answer to me. I don't know if I'd put that in the leader box, but
well, I understand. These are all things that you take them in and you go, okay, so.
But then who am I to say? Like, if it worked for him, fair enough.
Yes.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. I think genuinely inspirational. I think what we're talking about with resilience and knowing that there's light at the end of the tunnel, all of those things, I think it all kind of came together in that story. And I think there's powerful lessons there for leaders and for anyone in life, frankly. So when we think about these storms, as you call them, I do like that word, I have to say. It's very evocative. What would you say to offer encouragement to someone in the audience or elsewhere who might be really struggling with that right now? They feel like they're facing just endless numbers of these storms.
Yeah. That people talk about it. Mine were kind of back to back. It seemed like I was in a storm for a long time. I'm asked this question a lot, and the first time I was asked that, I think it was on a radio show, and I'm like, I kind of froze. I did the old, well, that's a good question, as I'm trying to come up with the answer. Don't quit. Quitting's not an option. The storm will end, as I said earlier. And I do believe very strongly that that is the hardest bridge to cross while you're going through a storm, is to understand that a storm is that middle ground between where we were and where we're going. It's not pleasant, but that's what's going on. And then the other advice that I would give, without spending another hour talking about it, is that look for the blessings in the storm. And there are blessings in the storm. But most of us are feeling so sorry for ourselves and are so wrapped up in all the negative stuff that's going on that we don't spend time looking for that, because there are blessings in that storm. And it's up to us to find them. And I talk about that in my book, what some of my blessings were. And, whether it's facing financial ruin and yet still realizing, wow, look at what I learned through this. I believe very strongly that people learn as much from adversity than they do from success and good times. Perhaps even more, because we're willing, we're open, we're vulnerable at that time to actually listen and learn. So that would be the storm will end, don't quit, and look for the blessings.
Yeah, I like that. 100% with you there on learning from adversity more than success. I think the same is true with mistakes as well. I think if everything's gone swimmingly, we tend not to look at why. We just move on. We're like, right, great, that's done, moving on.
Going.
Whereas if it goes wrong, you want to know why, don't you? So you dig in and try and find the lessons. It's another lesson of human nature there, I think.
I think we say, if it ain't broken, don't fix it.
Well, yeah.
I'm not saying that's the way it should be, but I'm just saying that's what it's good. So.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I think so. You mentioned faith as well earlier, and I think even for someone who doesn't have like that religious faith, I think there's an important takeaway there anyway, isn't there? Is having that faith that the storm will pass, having that faith that you will get through this, even if there's no evidence yet that that's true. That's where the faith can come in, even if it's not belief in God or whatever. But I think it is an important component, definitely.
So I will, use this moment to say that I agree with what you said. I will tell you, being where I'm at and what I've gone through, and given the faith that I have, I don't know how people get through these tough times without faith in God, quite frankly. And I'm not saying it can't. I'm just saying I don't understand, because, I had moments during this time, when you're on a radiation table and you're going to get radiation for the first time, and it's not one of your bucket list items. You're laying there and waiting for the machine to go hum, and that was a moment where, I said, I got to pray at that moment. And I basically at that moment said, I'm no longer in control. I'm moving over. God, you get in the driver's seat. You drive this and drive it where you want me to go. And that was releasing that control, David, that we talk about. And did I realize what I was doing at the time? Probably not. But do I recall it as a very, important part of the journey? Yes. So I would just say it that way, in a gentle way to people.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
People certainly, when they meet me, they know after a little while where I come from about things. So,
sure.
Anyway.
Yeah. I mean,
but your point about faith, at least having the faith to realize you got to keep going, because it will end. You just got to keep going. That's important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, did you have the faith before the storms, or was it a spiritual awakening because of them, or a bit of both?
Yes, I was a Christian. But I'm going to say that my faith was more in my head than my heart.
Huh.
And what these storms did to me was certainly deepen my faith. And I believe now I'm more of a follower than I am a fan, if that makes sense.
It does.
And, I believe very strongly that my Lord wants me to follow him and do as he did in helping others and being that servant to others and not just a fan. So.
Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, I've not been through storms anywhere near as bad as yours, so I can't comment on whether I might find
And I
faith if I
pray
did.
that you don't. And I pray that you don't.
Appreciate that. I appreciate that. But I do think, I mean, speaking for myself, I'm not massively religious at all. But I wouldn't say I was without faith. I think my faith is in people. It's in
Sure.
the world. And I don't know. As I say, it's not been tested as yours has. So I don't know. I wouldn't like to speculate.
You got a long ways to go, the way I look at it. So
I hope so. Yeah. Let's talk a bit more about leadership with the time we have left. I think what I'd really love to hear is the story you have of your best memory of being led. Because I always enjoy the answers to this question.
My best memories of being led. Sometimes I would say that we learn as much from our leaders that have led us in the past. We learn a lot from what they did as far as negative things, and you learn from that. This is tough because I think the best leaders. I'm trying to think back, and I've had a lot of people that either I was directly reporting to or someone above them, that when a leader shows interest in their team members, to me, that's a good sign. That's a sign of a good leader. And I could name numerous examples. And, one of them was I was getting my master's degree. I had to write a thesis in the end. And I actually did the research. And this is back when you went to the library to do your research, you had to get the film out and go through the film. And, it was just, it's not like today where you got the internet. Anyway, I wrote a paper on where I felt the construction industry was going over the next 5 to 10 years. Seemed appropriate. And I was working for a large building contractor at the time, North America. And I got done with that, and I sent a copy of it to both my boss, and also I printed off and sent a copy of it to the vice president in charge of U.S. operations. The company was out of Canada. And one day the vice president was in Minneapolis having meetings and meeting with my boss and that. All of a sudden the vice president comes into my office and said, "Hi, Bill." And I go, "Hi, Ron." Not that I talked to him a lot or whatever. And he said, "I really enjoyed that paper you sent me about the future of the construction industry." And that, I read it. And I said, "Well, thank you." And he said, "Do you have a copy of it here in your office?" And keep in mind, this isn't like you could pull it up on your computer and print it out, And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Can I have a copy of it?" And I said, "Well, Pat's got a copy." I gave a copy to him too. And he said, "Yeah, but he can't find it." So I learned two things there about leadership. And if you know what I mean, without going into a lot of details, but I still remember that. Vice president of U.S. operations coming into my office. I was just a project manager, and coming in and saying, "I'd like to see a copy of that. I need it right now." And that was good. It told me I had value. And So I remember that. I also remember leaders who are willing to pitch in, willing to help. I had one that he said, a lot of leaders say this, but I'm not going to expect anything of you that I wouldn't expect of myself. And boy, he lived that. Somebody'd be working on something, he'd walk by and he'd look and he'd say, "Here, let me help you with that." "Oh, I got it." "No, I got time. I'll help you." So, and no matter what it was, and even down to the very simplest thing, where one guy I worked for said to someone once, because he was going into a meeting, he asked one of the secretaries, as we called them back then, to make a cup of coffee, make some coffee and bring it into the conference room. And this guy, he got upset. The boss got upset with him for doing that. And, whether that was right or wrong, I don't know. But his point was, they've got a job to do too. If you want a cup of coffee, you go make it yourself.
Yeah.
And, so that stuck with me. These are all little things, David, but they're big things in there.
No, they absolutely. I mean, so they're those small daily moments that I think really make a difference to leadership, because they signal the kind of leader you are and the way that you see others. And both for good and ill in those stories, actually, because there was an example of each one, wasn't there, in most of those?
Yes.
I really love the, not asking someone to do something you're not prepared to do yourself. Like as a core principle of leadership, I absolutely love that. However, I feel like that is getting harder and harder to live by in this day and age, particularly as new generations enter the workforce, as new technologies seem to be invented every other week at this point. It's becoming, I think, in a lot of workplaces, basically impossible to do that now.
I would say that, and please don't think less of me for saying this.
I won't. No.
I'm on the twilight of my career. And there's days where I'm glad that I'm on the twilight of my career, because I don't know if I could go another 20 years, at a pace where, and with what's happening with the next generations that are coming up. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm just saying, I'm not sure how to keep up, so.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, the pace of change is getting ridiculous, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, I mean, I think a modern modification for that phrase is, don't expect anyone to work harder than you're prepared to work, because then you don't have to know everything, right?
And that's a great modification. Yeah. Yep. I've used that phrase where, I'm willing to work just as hard as you. And, that's important.
If you could start your career over again, is there anything you would do differently?
To make it simple, I would answer no. Are there some things that I wish would have went maybe a different way? Or are there times where things didn't go the way I wanted them to? Yes. But I've enjoyed the journey, and I'm going to say thus far. I've gotten to a point where I'm content. That doesn't mean I'm just going to sit around and, enjoy my gifts and enjoy where I'm at. No, I'm still going to keep plugging away at something, but I'm content with where my career has gone and how it's unfolded. And I don't want to second guess that.
I think that's probably what my answer would be as well. Although there definitely are moments where I look back on and I'm like, I wish I hadn't done that, or I wish I hadn't said that, or
I had a lot of moments. I said it, the times, for a few years after I came to the family business where oh my goodness, why am I here? Why did I do this? I'm dealing with family business. And then the Great Recession came. And I say this in all humility. And then I realized that I am there for such a time as this. And I'm quoting that from the book of Esther in the Old Testament. And I realized that I was put there by someone higher than me. I was put there to help lead our family business through its toughest and worst crisis in its company history.
You hit the nail on the head if you excuse the construction-themed cliche there.
Mm-hmm.
With what you said about second guessing, because I think it's like hindsight, isn't it? Like it's 2020 afterwards, but not so much at the time. So there's not much value in it.
Absolutely, David.
All right, Bill, last question, and this one is usually my favorite. It's called Leadership Heroes.
Leadership Heroes.
So if you had to pick one person, okay, it's got to be one. You can't have more than one, although people keep trying. But it can be literally anyone you can think of. So they could be alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, if you like, as well. But someone who, in your opinion, perfectly embodies leadership. So who is that for you and why?
So I talked with my wife last night on this. I said, who's my hero? And I read it just the way you would, past, present, dead, alive, fictional, or, not. And I said, David's asking a really tough question here. And pretty soon you're going to say, Bill, get to the answer. But anyway, I'm thinking about what a great leader is. Visionary, risk-taking, a servant, team-oriented, gentle. And I'm thinking of all those things. I was asked a similar question recently on something else, and it was, who out there right now, what leader out there would you like to sit down and have a conversation with? Not the same question, but I was having a 71-year-old brain moment at the time. I was thinking of Elon Musk, and I couldn't think of his name. It's like this blank stare into the screen, and I finally said Jeff Bezos, because of what he did to build that business and how he brought to life what the visionaries had talked about when I was younger. Someday you'll be shopping off your TV set or off your computer and all this, and we're all going, really? Yeah. And Elon Musk, what he's done is unbelievable. To think of all he's done, but even the one thing, the space travel and that, which when I was young, space was handled by the government. The government funded it. And now we got private enterprise in there. So, I mean, those people, at the end of the day, I'm going to tell you that if I think of perfectly embodies leadership, I'm going to talk about Jesus. And that would be my answer. So.
Fair enough. He is a popular choice for this question, I have to say.
Well, that's good to hear. And I'm going to say, whether you're a believer, whether you're a Christian or not, you have to admit he was able to get people to follow him. He was very visionary. He was able to deal with people in adverse conditions in a way that was respectful. And he changed the world as it was at that time. So,
yeah, and he's a great example of servant leadership as well. So obviously that appeals to me.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, as I say every time, and all the listeners have heard me say this before, like and as you've just said as well, like you don't have to believe in the religious aspects to still get value from the story.
That's right.
The stories, plural. The lessons are there. There are things to aspire to, and if you believe in him as a religious, as a god, then great. If not, that doesn't diminish the value of the lessons. That's all I'm going to say.
Sure. And I'm good with that.
And I'm glad you didn't pick Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos.
No, and that's what I'm saying. I think having a conversation with either one of them would be
100%.
phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
yeah.
Do I admire them as a perfect leader? No.
Yeah, you did have me worried, I'll be honest.
So, will I buy stock in their company? Yes.
Well, yeah, maybe. Yeah. One
from a
more than the
financial
other
standpoint, yeah.
Yeah, one more than the other, probably. But
yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Lovely. Well, Bill, I've loved this conversation. We've gone down some great and unpredictable tangents there, which is always the best discussions I find. One final small thing I will ask you is if anyone in the audience would like to learn more about you, perhaps get a copy of the book, where can they go? What are their websites and so on?
Yeah, my book was published by a New York publisher, so thus it's distributed wherever books are sold. Quite frankly, I mean, if you go to your local bookstore, they may not have a copy, but they'll certainly order one. If you go online, you can go to places like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, places like that. It's readily available. Or I have a website, and it's BillDerrick.com. Very, very easy. BillDerrick.com. Yep. If you go on there, you'll learn more about me, number one, which whether that's exciting or not. And you'll have a spot there where you can read find where you can order my book. You can click a spot there and you'll be able to order it right from my website. And you'll also learn about things I'm doing. And especially if there's a company out there, organization out there that's listening and said, I'd really like to have this character come and do a keynote speech at our next get together with leadership, with our company or whatever. There'll be information on there how they can contact me.
Okay. Well, it's an easy to remember website, but I will put it in the show notes anyway, just in case anyone forgets it.
Sure.
Lovely. Well, that's all we've got time for. Bill, thank you again so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, David. It's been a pleasure. I'd do it all over again. So
yeah, same here. Same here.
Okay. Thank you.
Bill, thank you again for your time and generosity today. Really enjoyed that conversation. So many things that I think the listener and myself can draw from those experiences that you've shared with us today, and such a great outlook on life as well. Listener, viewer, if you would like to learn more about Bill, do check out his website. It's down there in the show notes. As always, I do encourage you, go and learn more about the guest because the story doesn't end here. And if you are living in a universe where leadership feels like one of those epic quests from a sci-fi or fantasy adventure where you've forgotten your medkit, your healing potion, then the Integrity Leaders community is your starship, your party of adventurers. Join us today at leadingwithintegrity.co.uk for a sci-fi flavored adventure in leadership. Whether you see yourself as the captain steering the team through uncharted territory or the new recruit still finding your footing in leadership, this community offers the support, the resources, the knowledge, and the conversations that you need to lead with confidence, clarity, and creativity. You can join today for free as a leadership explorer and embark on a journey where leadership meets imagination a little bit. Or if you'd like to explore more resources, get access to development courses, one-to-one time with me, there are also paid tiers available. Information is on that website, leadingwithintegrity.co.uk. Navigate around, get a taste of some of the resources that are available on the site, some of the information. And when you're ready, hit that green button on the homepage and it will take you to the sign-up page for the community where you'll learn much more about it, how it works, what's available, what those various tiers will offer you, and so on. And if you have any questions, any queries at any point, whether now or right before you sign up, you'll find my LinkedIn details down in the show notes. Reach out anytime, drop me a message. As I always say, I'm always happy to chat leadership with pretty much anyone. That includes you. So all that remains for me to say is thank you so much for being with us this week. I hope you'll be back again next week when I'm talking loyalty, leadership, and more with my next guest, Mickey Anderson of Loyalty Ops. And that's going to be a great conversation you won't want to miss. So until then, have a great rest of your day, your week, and be a leader, not a boss.